Korean island, I guess.
Yeah,
very good.
I'm going to make everybody jealous. Not me. The beauty of the Puget Sound.
Anyway, you look quite relaxed.
You do.
We are live, sir.
All right. Vidyut, are we online?
Yes, sir. We are live.
All right. Thank you very much. I'd first request the registrar of the OP Jindal Global University in Sonipat to welcome us on behalf of the university. And then I'll say a few words about the school. But I think you ought to, since we are all here and such amazing people, hear a few words about our university. We are very proud of it. It's in its 11th year, with always on the cutting edge of things. So over to you, Sridhar.
Thank you very much, Professor Sudarshan. Good evening, everyone. And I must also say good morning and good afternoon to many of our friends and colleagues joining us from other parts of the world. On behalf of the OP Jindal Global University and the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, I have great pleasure in welcoming you all to the inauguration of the Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality, and Public Policy. In particular, I am delighted to welcome our distinguished speakers, Professor Brian Arthur, a well-known authority on this area, an economist and a complexity thinker. Professor Doyne Farmer, Director, the Complexity Economics Program, the Institute for New Economic Thinking, Oxford Martin School, and also our distinguished panelists, Dr. Anindya Chakravarti, a faculty member at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and Professor Anirban Chakraborty, a professor at the School of Computational and Integrative Sciences at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and Professor Attilio Stella, I hope I got the pronunciation correct. If not, I may be forgiven, a professor of theoretical physics at the University of Padua, and Professor Stephen Turner, professor for Science of Complex Systems, Medical University of Vienna, for agreeing to participate in the inaugural panel discussion convened by the center. I also take this opportunity to congratulate Professor R. Sudarshan, our Dean of the School of Government and Public Policy, Professor Naresh Singh, and Professor Debajit Jha, and Professor Anirban Chakraborty and colleagues from JNU for conceiving the idea of a research center on complexity economics, applied spirituality, and public policy, and establishing the center at JGU, which is an acronym of the OP Jindal Global University. Now, as a research-intensive university, the establishment of a research center on the areas of complexity economics, it augurs well with our core institutional values of interdisciplinarity, pluralism, and rigorous scholarship for which this university stands for. On this particular note, and for the benefit of all our friends joining us from other universities and institutions from around the world and participants from within the country and outside the country, I would like to take this opportunity to briefly introduce our university. The OP Jindal Global University was established as a philanthropic initiative of our founding chancellor, Mr. Naveen Jindal, in memory of his father, Mr. OP Jindal. JGU is a not-for-profit global university established by the government of Haryana and recognized by the university's Grants Commission. As a research-intensive university, which is deeply committed to its core institutional values of interdisciplinarity and innovative pedagogy, pluralism and rigorous scholarship, and globalism and international engagement, the university has established 9 schools: the Jindal Global Law School, the Jindal Global Business School, the Jindal School of International Affairs, the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, the Jindal School of Journalism and Communication, the Jindal School of Art and Architecture, the Jindal School of Banking and Finance, and the Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability that has been set up in this academic year 2020. I'm also pleased to share that we are starting our 10th school, the Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling, in 2021. The inauguration of the Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling and the launch of the BA Honors in Psychology will take place on Tuesday, the 29th of September, and the guests will be Professor Ian Paul Everall, the Executive Dean of the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology, and Neuroscience at the King's College London, and Dr. Nimesh Desai, the Director of the Institute of Human Behavior and Allied Sciences, the Government of Delhi. I take this opportunity to invite everyone to join us at the launch of the School of Psychology and Counseling on the 29th of September. In addition to 9 schools, we have 3 research and capacity building institutes: the Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences, the International Institute for Higher Education, Research and Capacity Building, and the Jindal Institute of Leadership and Executive Education. The university also has over 55 interdisciplinary research centers, and this is a very progressive and a dynamic number because as we are speaking, we are going to inaugurate our research center on complexity economics, spirituality, and public policy. In terms of our rankings and accreditations, I'm happy to share that the Ministry of Human Resource Development, Government of India, which is now called as the Ministry of Education of the Government of India, issued a letter of intent to select the university as an institution of eminence. And for those friends coming from outside India, I must tell you, the Institution of Eminence recognition is a scheme to identify and recognize universities in India with the potential to become world-class institutions. In addition to receiving the highest A grade from the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, we are humbled for having received the letter of intent to select our university as an IOE, or the Institution of Eminence, by the Ministry of Education of the Government of India. And this makes the university one of the only 10 private universities in India to be awarded the IOE status. JGU has been ranked the #1 private university in India in the QS World University Rankings 2021. And that makes JGU as the only IOE or the Institution of Eminence that has significantly moved up in ranking in the QS World University Rankings 2021. JGU is also the highest ranked Indian university, which focuses solely on social sciences, arts, and humanities, and the youngest Indian university to be ranked this year. I'm also happy to share that the OP Jindal Global University is the only Indian private university in the top 150 young universities in the world under 50 years of age in the QS Young University Rankings 2021. And I'm also pleased to share with each one of you present here and attending the meeting that the OP Jindal Global University is one of the few universities in Asia that maintains a 1:9 faculty-student ratio and appoints faculty members from India and different parts of the world with outstanding academic qualifications and experience. We are also ranked amongst the top 300 universities in the world in terms of our faculty-student ratio, which is 1:9, and we are ranked amongst the top 450 universities in the world in terms of employer reputation. Over 71% faculty have qualifications from leading international universities, and 62% of all faculty members are alumni of the top 500 universities as per the QS and the Times Higher Education World University Rankings. We are ranked amongst the top 500 universities in the world in terms of international faculty, which makes up 14% approximately of the JGU's total faculty. And this again is a progressive and a dynamic number because most recently, even during the pandemic times, we have hired some outstanding faculty members from India and outside India. And as I had mentioned at the beginning of my welcoming remarks, the establishment of a center on complexity economics and the discussion this evening is an important step that is in consonance with our vision and mission of interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity. And JGU is rightly placed to conduct research on an area as varied or as complex as the field of discussion this evening. We sincerely hope that this initiative will also mark the beginning of many collaborative projects. And I also take this opportunity to thank our Vice Chancellor, Professor C. Rajkumar, for his leadership and guidance on all these matters. I thank all the panelists and participants for agreeing to partake in the inaugural discussion, and our best wishes to the center, and I wish you all a very engaging meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Registrar Dr. Sridhar Patnaik, for introducing the university. I must say that, the School of Government and Public Policy, which started in 2012, which I joined after some 22 years in the United Nations Development Program, and where I was a colleague with Naresh, and that's how we known one another for a long time. Because of our association with the United Nations Development Program. And so when I took over as the first dean of the School of Government and Public Policy, it was my good fortune that a lot of people had goodwill and support for a new university and a new school in a new university. And so I want to record my debt of gratitude to Dr. Naresh Singh for being a strong supporter and for coming to our university for a number of years and pro bono inspiring our students and getting them interested in new areas, emphasizing interdisciplinarity. So this is an occasion, my colleague Debajit Jha has the formal role of saying thanks at the end of our program. But at the outset, I have to say that we wouldn't all be here but for Dr. Naresh Singh. And I'd also express my gratitude to Dr. Sudeep Patra, who's in the General School of Business, but has been a strong ally and supporter of initiatives taken in my school. And helped us organize a conference last year when Naresh was visiting the university. So this is the sort of antecedents or the background to us venturing into this field, which we've called complexity economics. And it's we know that the term has been coined by someone we are very lucky to have with us now today. We have applied spirituality, and I have to say that that was inspired by it's the title of a book by Swami Agnivesh. Now, Swami Agnivesh has been visiting our university as part of some World Constitution and World Law Forum, and he's been a great social activist in the country. And even though he wore saffron robes and belonged to a sect of Hinduism called the Arya Samaj, was a courageous and fantastic man who, was there at every point where, and he is responsible for starting a movement to end what you like a modern form of slavery, which is debt bondage, and releasing a whole lot of workers from that kind of bondage. He's responsible for releasing countless number of children working in the carpet industry and the match industries in India, who are also likewise in bondage because their families owed money or debts. And he's been an activist in terms of communal harmony between Muslims and Hindus and other faiths, the Christians in India. And he passed away a few days ago. but it was, we wanted to recognize that there's always been an interest in realms that are sort of transcendental and, if you like, spiritual among leading thinkers in different disciplines. And so applied spirituality, we thought, ought to be a concern for the center. And of course, it's a public policy school, and we hope that the research and the work that we do makes a difference to the real lives of people. And so the public at large may find, the work the research that we do incomprehensible, but the motivation for that research and its end, as it were, should be the well-being of people and the well-being of the planet. So these are the sorts of, for these reasons, we decided to give this center a rather long and somewhat intriguing title. But it really is a point in time where, because of the COVID pandemic, everything has been upturned. And so the general comfort of conventional disciplines and the knowledge derived from them, and our confidence that we may face the future armed with some insights from multiple disciplines and different fields, has all been overturned. And so this is a very appropriate time in a sense, because we are facing uncertainty, we are facing complexity, and we know that the human mind and the ingenuity and the phenomenal advances and discoveries in mathematics and physics can be brought to bear. So the social sciences needn't be insulated and say that if when you're dealing with the human beings, that methods of the natural sciences have no place. And human beings are, part of nature, and therefore many of the methods of the natural sciences will illuminate what human beings do or think, and so on. And so this field that's been opened up, which sort of replaces the conventional reliance on equilibrium and markets clearing and so on, is, as we know that all of that in a way was earlier questioned when the 2008 financial crisis happened, and the Queen of England famously asked, why didn't anybody see this coming? Well, I mean, they didn't have, they were not sufficiently empirical to see this coming. I mean, people get tied to theories and wish to see their theories experimentally or in real life proved. So, someone asked, oh, it works in practice very well, but is it good in theory? So there has been that kind of, economics has, among all of the social sciences, have had a certain fixation about, getting the theory right. And I think it's an important turn, a paradigm shift, if you like, to say, listen, I mean, you've got to look at data, you've got to look at facts, you've got to look at the empirical world and its behavior, and try to draw inferences from that. And that will enrich the discipline of economics. And so, this field, this combination is very exciting. And, we try to get our students, say, particularly those doing the BA honors in economics in our school, as well as the MA in economics and the MA in public policy, to understand that we need insights from multiple disciplines. It's not that you need to become an expert in all of them, but you need to know enough to be literate enough in these disciplines to know what that insight means and how relevant it is for some issue, some wicked problem that you're trying to tackle. And so this center, I think, will enrich all of our programs in the school as well as across the schools. And so I'm very grateful that this is happening. And you can be assured that, as Dr. Sridhar Patnaik mentioned, we are a very young university with lots of very young people. I mean, the Vice Chancellor is about 22 years younger than me, and Sridhar Patnaik is nearly the Vice Chancellor's age as well. And so it's a real nice thing in a way to have young people with a lot of energy in charge of leading this kind of university, and for encouraging us to set up centers, to have contacts across the globe. And so I also expect that Sridhar Patnaik is listening, that when we wish to do something, we wouldn't be hampered for want of some finance or funding, because that's the sort of thing which a research-oriented university ought to prioritize, and we do that. And even though our philanthropist, Naveen Jindal, who helped establish the university and provide all its capital costs, may not continue to do so in that way, we are a growing university with a lot of students joining, and the fee income has made us pretty much self-reliant. And so we, in a center like this, we should be able to, mobilize resources internally and externally, and I think we can do wonderful things. Before I end, I just want to say, I was remarking about that to Professor Brian Arthur, that when India became independent and started its planning commission, it was staffed by Professor Mahalanobis and Pitambar Pant. Both were physicists, and they were both good friends of the Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. And there was a very, very global outlook to the Indian Planning Commission. It brought economists from all over the world. We had great economists from Poland, from Nicholas Kaldor from England, Jan Tinbergen. And so I think there's been an openness to this kind of intellectual cross-fertilization of knowledge. Professor C.R. Rao, who was 100 years old and cut his cake in the United States, a few days ago, started out in the Indian Statistical Institute, founded by Professor Mahalanobis, and he worked on anthropology. I mean, they were interested in. He was set to work on, measuring, the cranium and physical features of different population groups. Now that may have had some antecedents in certain assumptions about human beings and whether they were all equal or not. Nonetheless, it gave a great fillip to important advances in statistics. So I think that spirit, has to be regenerated in our country. And I'd say that especially when we are concerned about the trends in politics, about populism, about leaders emphasizing pandering to a majority and ignoring the rights of minorities. Now, this is a widespread risk across the world. At such a time, I think this coming together of people from different disciplines, particularly in this field related to complexity economics and quantum physics and its applications in social sciences, is a very, very opportune moment. And I think everyone is open-minded and no longer confident and self-assured or cocky that they've got the answers. And so the spirit of discovery, I think, has come about. It's not just to save us from political consequences that are deleterious, but also to advance knowledge so that we stand on the shoulders of the great ones we have with us today. I'm so grateful to all of them, and look ahead. It's been said that even a dwarf standing on the shoulders of giants can look further. So we want to look further. So thank you very much. I'll hand over to Naresh to invite our two speakers.
So thank you very much, Dean Sudarshan. It's a great pleasure for me to have with us some of the leaders in this field. Everybody would have received short biographic statements. And because we are already running a bit short in time, let me just move directly to ask Professor Brian Arthur, who has been, we can probably call him without much quarrel or question, the godfather of this field, or maybe since he's still with us, the father of the field. Brian, without much more introduction, since they have your bio, let me turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, I am absolutely honored and delighted to be here this morning, and I enormously enjoyed the Dean's introduction a few minutes ago. I'm quite amazed that I know several of the people who are in the room, so to speak, including Stu Kaufman, friends from Singapore and other places, Don Farmer, Stefan Turner, and others. And thank you, Naresh, for setting this up. You went to an awful lot of trouble, so thank you very much. I want to kick off just by giving a thumbnail sketch of what complexity is about. Everybody here would have maybe a different definition. My definition is roughly this. It's more like a story. About 350 years ago, modern science was initiated in the 1600s, certainly. And nearly all that time, it's been reductionist. We're looking at systems, we're looking at them in finer and finer detail, animals, organisms, organs within those organisms, cells within the organs, and so on, right down to DNA. And we're understanding more and more. It's been hugely successful. But in the last 40 years or so, science has kind of reversed itself and gone a different path, or at least it's added a path, and that's looking at how things form, looking at how things come to be from the bottom up. We're looking at how elements form patterns, how do stars form galaxies, how do cars form traffic, how do B cells and T cells form immune systems. And when that happens, we're interested in how those elements react to the patterns they're forming. It may be, by the way, someone needs to mute. There's a lot of background noise here. Can you mute, please? So anyway, so complexity is all about elements creating patterns and reacting to the patterns they create. It's a very nice loop. I don't think it's a science on itself. It's more a movement in the sciences. It's more a way of thinking. And above all, it was made possible by computation. When we all got computers around 1980 or shortly after that, we started to be able to look at these systems that were interactive, interconnected, and forming, being able to see them on a computer screen and being able to model these things. Some of it came out of physics, some out of mathematics, and some out of other sciences. What I want to mention today is what difference does this make, or talk about very briefly here, in economics or policy. As the Dean said a moment ago, standard economics is very well thought through. The metaphor I would have is that it sees the economic world, or the parts of it it's looking at, as a machine. That machine is usually well oiled, it's humming along, it sees the economy as a system with the players in it and the agents, as we call them, the decision makers, doing their best, optimizing within a system that is in equilibrium with all the forces balanced. this is very much goes back to sciences of, I would say, the 1700s. But the idea is to take the economy, which may be changing and so on, but look at it, or the features of it that you're interested in, look at it as an equilibrium in a sort of timeless, unchanging way. That way you can study it mathematically. And the kind of policies that leads to this mechanistic view is to see the economy overall as a kind of like a very large power station, or if you prefer, a railway switching yard. So the economy is this huge power station, electrical system, grid system, and humans are standing outside that, pulling levers, turning dials, looking at indices, looking at needles on dials, and doing their best to control the whole thing or to change it, or maybe to help it grow, help it expand in some way or other. They're controlling it from the outside. Complexity economics itself, now everybody would in the room here might have their own definition, but let me give you, again, as a story, how I see this. Complexity economics is asking a question. What if the economy isn't in equilibrium? What if it's not timeless and in stasis, just sort of growing like an elephant grows? What if the economy or the parts of it you're interested in are constantly forming? What if it's open to change? It may be in equilibrium here and there, but what if it's open to change? This was the question, by the way, that we asked in 1988 at the Santa Fe Institute, and a lot of this thinking developed there. One of the people there was Stu Kaufman, who's here this morning, or sorry, this evening. Hi, Stuart, and very instrumental. I led the team. So we were looking at how might agents in the economy react to the situation they're in, and in doing so, how might they change it? And how might that bring about markets? How might that bring about structures that change in character? How might that bring economic development? Economic development, by the way, is not in equilibrium. It can't be, it's not developing. It's new things, new ideas, new structures, new features, not being added, but coming into being from human players. So complexity economics sees the economy not as a machine or a giant railway yard, but much more as an ecology. I'm an agent or a decision maker in the economy, maybe a government department or a firm, and I'm trying out strategies or actions or even forecasts in some situation, in some ecology created by other people, other people's actions, other people's ideas, other people's strategies. So where it's like animals are different species and different numbers of different species, forming a system or an ecology that those species are ever reacting to. Sometimes that settles down, we get equilibrium economics, and everybody over 60 can relax and settle down. Sometimes it's always changing, always creating itself, always recreating and newly forming. What kind of policy do you get out of that? I should throw my hands up in the air here, but actually what we're trying to do in this very different point of view is to see situations realistically as forming, as non-linear in their causes, and as interconnected. And the place of humans within this sort of ever-changing forming system is not outside controlling it, not perfectly, we're inside the system. As Dean Sundarshan just said, we're part of the system. And maybe we should see this as not a gigantic machine we're huffing and puffing to control, but something much more like a wild reserve, a game reserve. We're fencing here. We're creating boundaries there. We're encouraging things here. We're intervening there. So we're taking steps. We're looking at the formation of new structures. We're encouraging things. We're discouraging other things. We're trying to set up stable conditions. We're trying to set up institutions where things can interact in a healthy way and explore in a healthy way and flourish in a healthy way. I promised or warned Naresh that I'd say something about spirituality. I am newly exploring, I should say, ancient Hindu thought, and I greatly, I could say I respect that. Actually, I'm quite blown away by that on a personal basis. And I've been interested for at least 35 years in Taoism, or ancient Chinese thought that I cherish. I want to connect that with complex systems. There's two properties of complex systems. We see this in complexity economics as well. One is what I would call the pattern and elements connection. Cars are in traffic. Traffic doesn't exist. Traffic's an emergent property of cars. You can't point somewhere and say, that is a traffic there. That's a different traffic here. Maybe you can, but it's an emergent element. So I see complexity gives us a world where the whole, the overall pattern, or the overall, whatever you want to call it, outcome or cosmos or universe, is forming out of individual parts. But that whole and that overall structure is influencing the individual parts as well. And everything's swirling and changing and influencing each other. So it's a kind of parts create the whole create the parts. Traffic, in this totally mundane example, causes cars to change their behavior. Cars cause traffic. For me, a lot of that resonates in a, I wouldn't say a theological way, but just in a way of thinking about energies. The other thing, and we've some experts here from physics, but very often in complex systems, you see self-similarity. Basically, that the structures that emerge, think of Mandelbrot's set, structures are made from structures that are smaller systems of the overall structure. So you get systems within systems within systems. I'm fascinated by technologies being made from smaller technologies, which are collections of yet smaller technologies. So you see self-similar systems that repeat all the way down. For me, again, that resonates with at least one version of spirituality, but I also think it resonates with, if I may say so as an amateur, ancient Indian thought. What we're looking at in complexity is myriad interconnected energies forming structures, reforming themselves, forming structures within structures, and all of those contributing to creating what comes next. And the place of humans isn't dominating all of this. We're a pretty tiny speck inside this very large cosmos. We're not outside it. The last thing I want to say here is that there's an odd thing happening in the West. Odd things happening all over, and I'm not talking politics here, or COVID, for sure. I believe there's a very profound change happening in Western outlook, and especially in Western science. And this change has been going on for about roughly January 1900, a week after Max Planck declared the quantum, to 120 years, 2020. I don't want to be too fixed about this. It's pretty swirling, like a lot of what I'm talking about. If you take pre-quantum, pre-X-rays, 1895 in physics, science by and large saw the world as mechanistic. What causes this? What mechanism is behind that? As closed. It's a system, we can put it under a microscope and look at it there. As rather static. If we want to understand butterflies, we'll chloroform them and nail them to a board and look at them as a static system. Timeless. There might be things out there that are changing, but overall what we're looking at, say in ecology, isn't changing. At least we choose to look at them that way. And weirdly enough, under a lot of Greek influence, ancient Greek influence, we saw harmony and perfection in such systems. I don't deny any of that. I think it's insightful. It's brought us huge, huge breakthroughs. But in the last 120 years or so, it's changed. We're starting to see the world not as mechanistic or as consisting of parts or closed and static. We're starting to see the world as holistic and open to change, as subject to fundamental uncertainties. All of this was learned somehow in the 1900s in mathematics and physics, but very much also in biology and computer science. We're starting to see the world as creating itself from itself. And the remark I want to make here, and I think it's really appropriate for this new center that I'm thrilled with, is that this outlook is far more in harmony with Eastern thought than it is with our traditional Greek-based Western thought. Greek thought, human beings, systems. Humans control whatever. Everything's in equilibrium, everything's in harmony. We're starting to see the world as unfolding, changing, and never ending, and creating itself from itself. I think we have a tremendous amount, and I mean this seriously, to learn from ancient wisdoms of the East and maybe from some of the modern wisdoms of the East. And that's been a lot of what fascinates me, and I know it fascinates Stuart as well over many years. I want to finish by pointing out one thing. We're talking about economics here. We're talking about a new center in India. Here's a fact I want to point out. Nobody seems to think about this in the West. Maybe you do in India. The foundations of the modern economy in the West were not laid in the 1600s with joint stock companies in Holland. A lot of that was modern, or with the Industrial Revolution a bit later. The basic foundations for why the West got advanced economies were laid in the 1200s in the trading nations, largely around the Mediterranean, especially in Venice and Genoa and Italy, Pisa, places like that. What made the difference? There was a kind of financial revolution, not a kind of, an enormous financial revolution, brought us double entry accounting and banking and borrowing and trading, but above all accounting in the 1200s, brought in by Leonardo di Pisa, or now known as Fibonacci. Where did he get that from? He got it from the Arabs. Oh. Where did they get it from? They got it from India. They got it from Hindu mathematicians and Hindu scholars who were working centuries before. And this gave us the basis of modern numerals, now called Hindu Arabic numerals, that replaced the Roman numerals and modernized all accounting and all calculation in the West, but of course across the Arab countries and in India itself. We have a lot to thank India for. And I think that's a good place to help congratulate you on this new center you're opening. May you bring yet more ideas to the world as you have in the past, and congratulations. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. I know you might not be able to stay with us for the entire session. So while there will be a formal vote of thanks later on, let me take the opportunity to thank you for what was both insightful as well as very inspiring. I can only hope that we will be able to call on you from time to time, your time permitting, to provide your guidance. Thanks again. Okay.
And good luck.
Thank you. And it's now my distinct pleasure to ask Professor Doyne Farmer. Doyne, if you can switch on your video, that will be good for us to see you, as well as unmute yourself. Professor Farmer is director of the Complexity Economics program at the Institute for New Economic Thinking at the Oxford Martin School at Oxford University. So Doyne, I turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Can you see me and hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good. Well, I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled in particular to see this new center emerging for complexity economics. I think this is greatly needed. And it's great to see Jindal University being on the forefront. Why is it so greatly needed? Well, economics is something we might, in the past at least, I underestimated its importance. But with something like the COVID pandemic, it hits us squarely in the face how essential economics is. Because economics is, if I can use an analogy, it's the metabolism of civilization. It's the digestive system that takes natural resources and human labor and converts them into goods and services that people need. Economics is what allows us to exist by producing the food that we eat, the clothes that we wear, the structures we live in for shelter, and so on. It sits at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if economics doesn't work, then the rest of the pyramid of our hierarchy of needs ceases to function. If economics isn't right, then art can't flourish. Then you see during the crisis of 2008, there was a rise in mental illness due to economic stress. So it affects every aspect of our lives. It's essential to our being. And yet, when we try and understand the economy, when we try and create policies that will make it work right, that allow us to, as Brian said, make those little adjustments here and there, how do we go about doing it? Well, conventional economics is has locked in to one way of viewing the world. And in that view of the world, it begins by assuming that everybody has a utility function, or at least a set of preferences, that everybody acts to maximize their utility, and that they have a belief system, which is often starts with rationality or some modified form of rationality that allows them to maximize that. And it imagines a world in which everybody has selfishly maximized their own utility. They've done all the calculations to make exactly the right decision so that they have maximized their utility. Now, that doesn't sound like the world that I live in. That's not how I have lived my life, and I don't see others doing that. There are elements of that, and this kind of modeling can be very useful for some stylized situations, but it's not really capturing the richness of the real world. Now, in 2020, there's a whole new world of big data and computation. The internet, well, computers have given us the internet. The internet has given us the ability to capture data about human behavior, and it potentially gives us a revolution in social science because we can record in great detail what people actually do. And for economics, this means we can record in detail the decisions they make that relate to their material well-being. We can record what they buy and sell, what they produce. We can record who sells who, what, to whom. And we can look at how these evolve through time, how do new inventions come about, how do new products arise. Potentially we have information about all of that. And yet this old view of maximizing utility as the model of the world is not well suited to understanding that world. If you really want to do a theory based on utility maximization, you have to do mathematical calculations about how the agents that are making decisions do this. Those calculations are extremely hard to do, and therefore the models have to be simple enough that they can be solved. And so there's a giant disconnect between the complexity of the real world and the models that are feasible to understand it. In contrast, complexity economics offers a whole new way to think about this problem and take advantage of the vast data resources that now present themselves. It allows us to think about modeling the economy from the bottom up, using computers to simulate what the economy does, and to study the interactions of the agents who make decisions in the economy without prejudging what they do, to actually just observe it, to make empirical models about their behavior, not prejudging what their goals are. And as Brian stressed, and I want to stress the same thing, thinking about the economy in ecological terms. Now, why is that so important? And why is it natural? And what do I even mean? Well, what is an ecology, first of all? An ecology is a set of organisms who interact. And the key that makes it an ecology is there are different types of organisms, each of which is specialized, each of which performs a certain function, inhabits a certain niche, and makes its living by exploiting these niches and extracting energy, food and energy from the environment. And ecology is about the study of the interactions of these specialized agents. Now, similarly, how does the economy work? Well, in the economy, we have literally thousands of specialized agents. I mean, I'm not just pulling that number out of a hat. If you look at the list of professions, there, depending on the fine grayness with which you look at it, there are thousands of different professions. There are tens of thousands of different industries. There are the order of 80 million different companies that are active in the globe. And all of these are interacting with each other and interacting with individuals. So you have a vast network of interacting agents, a vast, rich, and complex network. These agents are making contracts with each other all the time, meaning they make commitments that conditionally change. They put in triggers about events in the future. If this happens, then an event is automatically triggered by the presence of that contract. And again, contracts are very specialized. There are literally billions of contracts that are active in the world at any given moment in time. So you have this extremely rich and complicated ecology of interacting agents. And in contrast, if you look at a traditional economic model, you'll have a few representative agents, perhaps in a very modern model, some distribution of agents, say ranging from poor households to rich households, and that's the proxy for heterogeneity. But you simply can't take these models and match them in any one-to-one way with the real world. Complexity economics seeks to change that by modeling the world directly and simulating the actions of the world, as Brian stressed, allowing for dynamics. A typical complexity economics model is an agent-based model where you have algorithms that represent each of the types of agents. Those agents are heterogeneous and of many different types. And the model is a dynamical system, meaning that you initialize the model in some way, you hit a start button, and then the agents begin interacting with each other in time. And as they interact, the economy that they generate, that emerges from their interactions, evolves through time. Now, of course, we're not going to just make one big model for the economy in great detail. We make models for different facets of the economy that illustrate different points about the economy, but the models all have the same basic character that I just mentioned. And so, you know, we've seen an emergence of new kinds of models looking, say, at the financial system, at instabilities and feedbacks in the financial system to see how those generate financial crises, to look at financial bubbles, booms and busts, where do those emerge? Those models, I would say, have given us a much deeper understanding about, for example, the crisis of 2008. And, you know, we have a model for what we call the Basel leverage cycle, where you see very clearly how well-intended risk management practices during the crisis of 2008 led to a situation where you were almost guaranteed, well, let me say, risk management practices that were well-intended and made sense in a world where each agent is isolated from the rest of the world, combined with aggressive greed that led to the extreme use of leverage, that is buying assets with borrowed funds. You can easily show how if you just combine those two elements and you let the system we built evolve through time, you see a 10-year slowly building bubble followed by a crash. And that's just becomes unavoidable. And you see a sharp transition from a stable system to such a system. So you can get deep insights into how instabilities in the economy emerge because you've embraced the dynamics of the economy from the beginning. We are building out of equilibrium models that allow the economy to evolve through time, and we can study the way in which instabilities happen. I've actually just released a new paper about looking at the financial system as an ecology, where you can see that, yes, there is a stable, efficient point. It actually builds on work that Brian and co-authors did 30 years ago now on ideas that I had a long time ago, but you can see that the statistical uncertainty in the performance of strategies in the economy naturally generates large excursions away from equilibrium, and you very easily and automatically venture into zones where markets cease to function in any efficient manner. That is, prices don't reflect fundamental values, and markets make volatility that is not generated by real information from the outside, it's generated from within itself. And the key is that if you want to understand how markets malfunction, you have to think about the economy as an ecology, and you have to think of it as being out of equilibrium. And the mainstream ideas, which are based on equilibrium and efficiency, simply tie your hands from being able to build models that help us understand that. Now, you know, as we sit in the present, we're facing major problems. We have massive inequality throughout the world. We're looking at huge economic uncertainties caused by climate change. We're looking at potential financial instabilities that will be caused by the COVID pandemic and the COVID pandemic itself, which is generating enormous economic stress throughout the world. If we have to address these problems, and if we're going to address these problems in useful ways, all of them involve the economy being knocked out of equilibrium. All of them involve deviations from efficiency. All of them involve endogenous evolution in the economy. And the tools and methods we have from complexity economics are really the only way that we have to address these. And yet, it's still a small minority of economists that are really pursuing these ideas. I think the time is ripe and things are about to change. And your new center, by positioning itself where it is and actively pursuing this, has the potential to really change the landscape in economics, to make a major contribution to higher welfare and make the world a better place, and really make contributions to all of the major problems that society is facing and which affect us all in so many ways. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Noin. Again, so much in a few minutes. Lots of food for thought. Thanks again, and I hope you can, as you have indicated, be able to stay with us and engage a little bit, maybe towards the end of the panel as well. We'll appreciate that. Thanks again for joining us. We are about to move into the panel discussion. Before we do that, let me just say a few words about the center and what we are planning to do, and then we'll move into the panel discussion. So the center will have three main streams of work, all related to public policy. These streams are complexity economics and public policy, quantum social science and public policy, and the third one, as you have heard, is applied spirituality. It is this link to public policy, national or international, that is the principal sort of defining feature of our center. So as an academic center, of course, we will offer undergraduate and postgraduate courses, research, publications, professional development, and outreach and advocacy. So why the center and why now? Public policy, as we all know, deals with societal problems which require public resources and leadership for resolution. And why now? Just look at the world. A global pandemic with no end in sight, a climate crisis, species extinction at a rate we have never seen before, social, racial, and caste injustices, poverty and inequality, violent conflicts, democracy under threat, it seems like in two of the biggest democracies, and the perversity of public policy agenda still driven by equilibrium models and GDP growth as its main objective. SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals progress, has been slow or even reversed, according to the UN 2019 report. Declining trust in government, public policy and institutions, and even among people, among each other. For example, in America, 75% of the people think that trust in government is shrinking, and 64% think that trust in each other is declining. To make matters worse, of course, as we mostly recognize, these problems are not independent, different problems. They interact, and so they make each crisis worse and even more difficult to resolve. Many of these problems cannot be treated adequately with equilibrium models or linear reductionist cost-benefit instruments alone because they are far from equilibrium. They are nonlinear, dynamic, and evolutionary, as we have just heard. They are self-organizing and emergent, and hence complexity economics is one of the main streams of the center. In addition, these problems are almost always characterized by inherent uncertainty, probabilistic features, interdependent linkages and influence, and hence our interest in quantum social science. And thirdly, applied spirituality. At the core of all these problems is the human feeling of separateness from one another and from nature. This seems to be the source of fear, insecurity, competition more than cooperation, greed, etc. These drivers in turn lead to social injustice, economic inequality, environmental degradation, and all the other problems, social public policy problems I've just mentioned. Yet the core spiritual teachings of all the major religions, and we will not be getting into organized religion as such, but the core mystical or spiritual tradition in Christianity, if you look at the work of Father Thomas Keating or the St. John of the Cross, or in Hinduism, Advaita Vedanta, the Upanishads, Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and so on and so on. in Islam, Sufism, in Buddhism, in Taoism, the essential teachings are that this separateness, this false sense of ego is illusory. So many of the scientific disciplines we are talking about here, complexity sciences, quantum field theory, for example, the implicate order of David Bohm, look at the conversations between Bohm and Krishnamurti, for example, neuroscience, exciting work being done in California by Donald Hoffman and others, the more recent consciousness studies going beyond the traditional hard problem are now all exploring and in fact providing data for the scientific foundation of these traditional mystical teachings. Applied spirituality then in our work will be about using the understanding that our notion of separateness and the imaginary ego might not only be illusory, but the source of much of our social and public policy problems. This has the potential to help us formulate policies and build capacities that go beyond symptoms and address the causes, and hence that third stream. Two words of wisdom sayings that I found very interesting. One is we cannot solve, and we all know these, we cannot solve our problems today with the same kind of thinking we used to create them. And you know, the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. Both of those are attributed to Einstein. And the one that from H.L. Mencken that I found very interesting is that for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. Now, this one is intriguing because over the last 3 decades of my work in public policy, I know how much public policy makers rely on the KISS principle. Most of us might be familiar with the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid, which sort of came out of the US Navy in 1960, but it's been adopted by policymakers all the time. So policy advisors like myself have always had to deal with this, keep it simple, even when the problem is complex. So this will be a major challenge for our center going forward, that of effective communication, making complex problems clear and simple, but not too simple. Let me, before I turn to the panel now, make a few announcements. One is to let you know that we will have a similar panel on quantum social science and public policy towards the end of October, and we will be sending out flyers to inform you about this. I think that is scheduled for October 21st. And then we will have another panel on applied spirituality, which will happen towards the end of November, hopefully around November 24th. We are also already, and I'll put this now on the screen, if I can. Give me 1 second here. I hope you can see that. So we are going to have a conference in January on artificial intelligence in complex socio-economic systems and public policy. And that will be on January 20th to 23rd. Of course, that's a bit away, and we will keep you informed about that conference, but just that you are all aware. And we are engaged now in the publication of a volume to be published by Springer in their the Springer New Economic Windows series, which is on quantum decision theory and complexity modeling in economics and public policy. This volume that we are about to publish is drawing from some papers of a conference earlier this year, but we are also asking colleagues and scientists, economists working in the field to consider contributing papers to this volume. And Professor Anirban Chakraborty is taking the lead with us, and he will be delighted to get in touch and to share the details of this volume. We are hoping that we can receive abstracts by the 15th of October, and then the draft chapters by the end of January 2021. So with that, I will turn to the panel. And let me, again, you have the bios for our panelists. Let me just say that we will have them present in alphabetical order. So I will call on them, and our time is really running out. It's become very short time now. We have 4 panelists on the list, but they will be joined by Professor Stuart Kaufman, and Stu agreed to join us a little late, so that's why his name doesn't, and his very handsome photograph is not on our flyer, but we will call on him as well. So let me start right away with Professor Anindya Chakravarti as the first panelist. Anindya, can you unmute yourself, put on your video, and please.
Can you hear me?
Thank you. If you can keep it to 5-6 minutes.
Yeah, I will definitely do that. Am I audible?
Yes, we are hearing you. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I will share my screen. So notice, just a quick question. Let me know if you can see the screen.
I can, yes.
Okay, excellent. So thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here, and especially with some of the greatest scientists who started this field. So it's a great experience for me as well. So here I will just talk about, just introduce a very few problems that have their origins. Most of the studies have been done in India, and then I'll talk also a little bit about some of the new ways that I think complexity science is taking a shape. And then we will maybe later on take up them on in terms of discussion. So just a couple of pointers on some some work that has been done in the, let's say, previous about 10 to 15 years in India, and actually it goes before that, but I have been familiar with this literature mostly from, let's say, 2008 or 9. So my experience and involvement goes back for about 10 to 12 years here. So there was a lot of, there was actually a pretty substantial volume of work on kinetic exchange models, which were proposed to model income and wealth distributions, and essentially the, the regularities, that is statistical regularities in them. And then the next problem that was again was originated in India. It's called Kolkata Pice Restaurant problem. So Kolkata, as you know, is the earlier name of the city Calcutta. So now it's called Calcutta. Interestingly, it has an origin in the El-Fadal bar problem that Brian Arthur in the beginning of 90s, probably around 93, 94, I think he wrote the first, he published this AER journal article in American Economic Review. That was more like a problem of coordination and guess with very limited information set. So here in this Kolkata Pice Restaurant problem, the whole literature around it, there is also a lot of literature on it, which I would request if all of you, if you have time to look at. The generalization was in terms of the strength of interactions, as well as how much information would be available, and also how many choices are available. as opposed to the Elford-Albert problem where the choices were very limited. The Kepier problem sort of had done away with that constraint. The other two topics that we have been studying a lot in within India, Anirban is one of my very frequent colleagues. There are pretty large number of other people as well who have a very active involvement in this research. This third one is on network view of financial and economic architecture. So, mostly focusing on, a network view on risk as well as shock propagation through financial as well as economic networks. And the final one is in terms of market structure and evolution, especially given a very large shock like COVID. Exactly how does the market structure change? And if we take it as a kind of an exogenous event, utilizing the, this new literature on causal econometrics, if we take it as an exogenous event, which was unexpected, then the way the market structure would change, that tells us a lot about how people's behavior would I mean, it allows us to infer how people behave in front of a large change, and this allows us to do causal econometrics basically. So by avoiding the problem of endogeneity. So some of the problems regarding the fourth point on network market structure and evolution is something like, when there is an let's say I will give you a very specific example and then I will move ahead because there is not a lot of time. But the example could be something like whenever there is an announcement of this order that there is now a pandemic, then that obviously changes economic incentives to engage in certain kinds of research, mostly from the point of view of the companies who would be engaging in R&D with respect to developing the vaccines. And the moment they do that, because it's almost always a zero-sum game, then there will be resources that will be taken out of other potentially productive R&D activity. So there will be a spillover effect. And this we are trying to establish through studies of other earlier pandemics. I mean, they were never this large, but there was this problem of H1N1 or SARS or MERS, and how that created changes in because they changed the incentive structure and how that changed the course of innovation in the healthcare industry as well as R&D as well. So, which brings me to a discussion on which I think Brian Arthur as well as John Farmer previously said that people would have probably very different ideas about what is complexity. So here, from the point of view of thinking about emergence as well as interconnections, one change that at least that is something that I am familiar with and I am very intimately involved in terms of research is thinking more about the whole change in the system from a data science point of view. So the earlier literature used to rely a lot too much on the whole idea of nonlinear dynamics, whereas the new literature is focusing a lot more on network theory and machine learning. I think the reason being that, and that has been actually probably a pretty good change, a good shift. The reason being that there is an enormous amount of data, which sheds a lot of light on how people behave and how incentives are structured, etc. Now, very interestingly, there is a new literature which combines econometrics. Econometrics is essentially making inference based on finite amount of data. So most of the time, as an economist, you cannot run a lot of experiments. So what you have to rely on is basically observational data, which you have collected from the field. And it becomes a bit difficult to do causal inference from data collected from the field because you cannot. There is this idea of ceteris paribus change, that you cannot make everything else constant and change only one parameter because everything is evolving at the same time. But still, one can do a lot of causal inference. Now there is a lot of literature, or at least a pretty substantial volume of literature that tries to combine the ideas of causal econometrics or causal inference with network theory, where the network can be as general as possible and as intricate as possible. And as probably all of you would know, that this year's Nobel Prize in Economics went to the trio of Banerjee, Duflo, and Kramer for introducing causal inference in economics through the toolkit of RCT, or this randomized controlled trials.
And India,
Having
if
said,
you can wrap up in 2 minutes or so.
Yeah, sure. I will actually take probably less than that.
Okay, thanks.
So going forward, I think there is a lot of opportunity to introduce statistical physics of networks, because that is something that's not incorporated in the classical econometrics or even the new asymptotic theories that are being developed. Whereas the ideas of reducing networks to some measurable elements of centrality, for example, that gives us a new way to summarize a very intricate structure into a one-dimensional or maybe two-dimensional object. So in terms of public policy, given that this school will be fully dedicated towards public policy, then it's worth thinking about how can we contribute to this world with high resolution? Well, I mean, what kind of exploitation we can do with the high resolution data that we have. So a couple of things, at least from the point of view of economics, that are now possible, which was almost impossible earlier. So earlier, most of the theoretical models in economics would talk about introducing a tax and having a very reduced form, kind of a representative agent model of how the production sector will work. But now we have, there is one paper that I'm working on right now with Anirban, where we have from the tax authority, we have collected full-scale data of how each plant is connected to every other plant. So you know that if you now change one part of, let's say, tax scheme, let's say one particular tax is levied, then we can actually trace out how the full ripple effect would be seen throughout the network. We don't have that good data to find out the complete ripple effects, but in near future, I can imagine that kind of data would be available. In our institute in Ahmedabad, we are engaged also in a lot of research on this public policy, public health policy based on textual data, which is mostly collected from social media, which allows us to infer very large scale social networks, as well as the new type of industries which come in the form of platform-based business like Uber or Amazon even. And in some sense, they actually solve a lot of problems which had been classically recognized as problems of complexes. Like there would be a huge number of buyers, huge number of sellers. Simultaneously they are solving the problems of how to match them, how to increase coordination, how to do supply chain management, how to talk about failure propagation. And at the same time, they have to do forecasting. And each of these things would have to be done in real time. So a lot of these things, at least from the management point of view, this whole idea of complex systems seems exactly apt. And the list is virtually endless of the number of things, the number of new types of products coming up, number of new businesses coming up, number of new ideas that are coming up. So I would like to congratulate all the people, including Professor Naresh Singh, as well as the Dean and the Registrar and Anirban, obviously, for being involved here in building this new center. It's as far as I know, it's the first center which on complexity within India, which emphasizes economics. The other centers are typically more about biology and physics and so on. I hope this center will do very good. Hope to get in touch with all of you in near future, and best wishes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, India, and thanks for pointing out, the shift to network theory now, and machine learning and the use of big data. These will be all extremely important to our center, to our work, and we look forward to collaborating with you. I hope you will also consider writing a chapter for our publication, which is coming up, and I'm sure Anirban will be in touch with you on that. So thanks again.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again. We will now move to Professor Anirban Chakraborty. And let me recognize at the outset that Anirban has been extremely helpful to me and to all of us in getting the center off the ground, and is taking the lead in many of the initiatives that we are doing. So let me publicly acknowledge his contribution and his leadership. And I turn it over now to Anirban Chakraborty. Thanks, Anirban. Go ahead.
Am I?
You need to unmute.
Yeah.
You are still.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we are seeing the screen, but all it says is that you're trying to share the screen.
Okay. Is it better now?
No, it's not yet visible, not to me.
Anyway, I think the screen will be visible. So thank you, Naresh, for
Yeah, we
giving
can
me
see
this
it now.
opportunity.
We can see it now.
Great.
Great.
So I would want to start with this quotation of Gus Speth when he told actually that I used to think that top environmental problems were biological ecosystem collapse and climate change. I thought that 30 years of science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top problems are actually selfishness, greed, and
Oh, we have lost you. And India, your I don't know if you're hearing me, but your connection might be a bit weak. And India, we're not hearing you. I don't know if IT can help, or if you want, you might have to speak without connection. You need to unmute yourself again.
You need to unmute yourself.
yes, is it okay
Yeah,
now?
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that is why our center aims to do this complexity economics and applied spirituality. And why we are doing that, we've already heard Brian Arthur, Dwayne Farmer, Anirban saying that the coronavirus epidemic pandemic has been actually one of the most economic crises that we're facing since the 1930s depression. And a wonderful article written by David Krakow and Jeffrey West from Santa Fe Institute were saying that the way we have to approach is through complex system studies. Similarly, when we had the 2008 crash, people didn't know how to react, and there were a series of papers written by both economists and physicists, which told that a complexity theory. So this was written by, of course, Dwayne Farmer and a group, and again Dwayne Farmer, Duncan Foley, and others. And so we have to combine these traditional tools of economics, physics, mathematics, computer science, and so on. And what is the complexity theory and thing? So there are several approaches you'll find, and as both Brian and Dwayne suggested, these systems are multi-coupled, multi-layered, so there are nonlinear features and emergence, spontaneous ordering, adaptation, and all. So in my own research, I have addressed several problems using these different approaches, starting from game theory, nonlinear dynamics, collective behavior, and lately network theory, pattern formation, and so forth and so on. We've had actually a series of conferences and books to start these subjects in India, and also when I was in France. And all these articles and books are available. We actually celebrated the 15 years of Econo physics, which was the word was coined by Gene Stanley in 1995. And in this volume, actually, 40 different scientists from 30 different countries, told about the development of econophysics in the respective countries. And we've had a series of books and things which we have been doing from India, a substantial amount of work, which Anindo was saying, on kinetic exchange models, but also on other types of econophysics problems. How we address these problems, basically, so I wanted to give an example. One, what he was telling as a kinetic exchange model, where people are supposed to just exchange money or wealth, and then you see the distribution of wealth in the different countries. And what we have actually given microeconomic models, which suggest that once you increase savings, the inequality goes down. So this was an outcome of the model which we had proposed in 2000, which was based on the kinetic theory of gases in physics. And then when you actually try to see, the relation between the Gini index, which is a measure of inequality, and gross domestic savings, you see such a negative correlation. Of course, this is valid for closed economies and very small countries, but we have done this set of work which has been also covered in different popular scientific journals and in different books of economics. We've been also working on network theory, what Naresh was saying, or what Doyne was saying, that you have different types of networks which can be constructed from ethnic conflicts, human rights violations, terrorism attacks, and behind all these are often either games of power or games of wealth and inequality. And so we try to use these measures of complexity theory along with the traditional tools of economics and game theory to understand what is going on. The third domain that we've been working a lot is basically the financial markets, where we try to see, how the different types of economy at different levels work and how the influence of one network has on the other network. And we've had a series of papers where we have used tools from physics, such as random matrix theory, but also other tools like phase separation and critical phenomena. And these things become very important because, the typical market crashes can be considered as critical states. And there was a wonderful article in Science in 2012 where they showed, that during a normal period, it's more modular and heterogeneous, but during a stress period, it becomes more connected and homogeneous. And that's what we had shown way back in 2003 using some network theory. And in this day, we continue to use different tools such as network geometry and topological data analysis to study different markets and see how the market evolves, and or the continuous monitoring of the financial market, because these things can help us not only to understand what has happened in the past, but also to perhaps forecast the crashes or economic downturns. So what we have been doing is basically a combination of different tools from physics, from computer science, such as machine learning, unsupervised learning especially, and then traditional economics, and try to have a cross exchange of ideas between these subjects. So this was a sort of a brief overview of the problems that we were addressing. Most of them have already been introduced by the speakers before, and so I would like to basically end here that there are a lot of challenges that we need to face, especially when it comes to public policy framing. And some of the tools and works that we are doing can be used. For example, the Jan Jan Dhan Yojana, which was launched by the current Indian government in 2014, has encouraged savings. And what we are showing is that with simple mathematical models, that once you encourage savings, the inequality would automatically go down. So we would like to see it being implemented in public policy. Similarly, the market and banking regulation can be benefited by this continuous monitoring, and where we use these different tools from network theory and complexity theory. So we would want to work hand in hand with social scientists, mathematicians, computer scientists, and that's the whole aim of the center. So thank you very much for your attention. I will stop sharing, and we will have a panel discussion at the end.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Anirban. Thank you so much for being brief as well. We will now move to Professor Attilio Stella, who is Professor of Theoretical Physics at the University of Padova in Italy. So, Attilio, over to you. Unmute yourself, please.
So, thank you for the invitation, and congratulations for this inauguration of the center. I know the time is very short. I think I will talk very shortly about some experience of research, which is really personal of my group. So, in the field of complexity economics, an achievement of the last years has been the realization that the comparative analysis of the composition of the export baskets of countries worldwide should enable to establish consistently rankings of national economies in terms of productive potential and of products in terms of specialization. This is well-known work, and everybody knows that these rankings are generally based on evaluation of what people call economic complexity indices for the countries and product complexity indices for the products. These rankings are very useful and can be used to foresee, maybe if compared with the gross domestic product per capita, for example, these indices can give forecasts about the possible growth of some national economies and similar things. Now, let's say in my group, one thing we did recently was to construct these kind of indices based on starting from a typical indicator of biodiversity in the context of several sciences. The Shannon entropy function is the basic ingredient which we used. This is an indicator of biodiversity, but we showed that there is a consistent way to reach from this starting point measures which have the properties of ECI and PCI. So I can show you the result, for example, if we apply our technique to get the efficiency measure, the fitness measure for countries worldwide, you get in the year 2015, for example, this kind of map, where, of course, each color, the various degrees of color correspond to the fitness measure which we have. Now, in this direction, what we tried to do was an attempt which is somehow ambitious. Now, all these constructions of ECI and PCI measures are just static. Now, pushing further the assumptions which laid the basis for this development, we decided to attempt the following: to construct on the basis of the data available from the global trade network about exports worldwide, to construct a model of the evolution in time of this kind of baskets. So essentially, we wanted to pass from a description in terms of a static description, let's say, to a description in which these baskets evolve in time. And there are ingredients in the model we did set up, which are, I think, interesting and very much in the philosophy of the complexity approach. Now, one characterizing feature of this dynamical stochastic model of basket evolution for the exports is the fact that the variation in time of the value of each individual export in a given basket depends, among other things, on a term which is connected to the fact that there are transfers of resources from the production of the export you consider and the production of other exports in the basket. So these transfer terms, which assume at the end the meaning of kind of interaction between exports, so that the exports somehow will play the role of agents in a philosophy of complexity economics. This transfer of resources is very important because occurring at the same time with other effects can give the result of enhancing the average global growth or depressing it. So the mechanism is the following. you know that in the model, we have that each individual export is subject to fluctuations in the conditions of growth, which can be favorable or unfavorable on the basis of the fact that you have a noise acting, a correlated noise acting on the growth of the individual export. Now, if this occurs concurrent with the fact that there are these transfers of resources, what happens is that the combination of the two effects can have a constructive or a destructive effect on the average global growth of the whole goods in the basket. So this is essentially a kind of situation which you face in portfolio optimization problems. Now, the possibility of simulating the model with different conditions, for example, with different values assumed for the average rate of transfer between different productions in the system, gave us the possibility to make a counterfactual analysis in which we essentially do the following. We look at a certain period of time at a certain country and look at the development of the export basket in the country. There is an historical data which, for example, characterize the average rate of transfer which occurred in the history between products. And there is, at the end of a certain period, a certain average total growth of the whole basket of exports. Now, we can, by simulation...
We'll have to wrap up very quickly. In a minute or two, please.
Yes, well. So essentially, what we can do is to simulate histories in which this kind of development occurs with different rates of this transfer of resources. And the result is that for each rate, we can plot what is the final result for average growth. So it's a kind of counterfactual analysis which we do. Now I don't see how to go back to the... Okay, so the result then is the following thing. You see here, we have the case of USA, China, and Russia in the period between 1995 to 2015. And in Ashisa, we plot the parameter, which is the rate of transfers between different productions. And in the y-axis, we have the average growth. You see that in the case, and see this arrow, the red arrow, represents the historical record. So historically, the rate which we recorded is this value here, and the average rate is the following, which is well simulated by these crosses, which are the simulation results. You see, in the case of USA, you see that essentially the growth which occurred is already essentially in an optimal situation. So there is no point to change the rate of transfers between different productions in order to improve the global average growth. In the case of China, it is impressive the fact that if you just shift to the right the rate of transfers, you expect to have a very strong effect. A similar effect you get also in Russia, for example. So this kind of effects, which you can test on this model, certainly should be of interest for politicians when they want to learn about what to do in a given system. Because you see, this rate of transfers are certainly not completely under control of politics, because there are transfers which are, for example, only based on let's say, are just constrained by productive conditions and cannot be moved. But there are other ways to incentivize the transfers through taxes, through political tools somehow. So this is just to give you an idea of this approach. And another point, which I just want to recall by closing, is the fact that the presence of this term, which gives the rate of transfer between different productions, is important also because it allows to distinguish between the part of the growth which is directly, let's say, due to direct input of resources in the various goods, direct input, and the part of the growth which we like to call a kind of cooperative growth, because it's just due to the fact that there is this transfer. So this distinction and this category of, say, cooperative effects is very important and is typical of physics, and I think is very appropriate for a complexity economics approach. So I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Attilio Stella, for sharing with us. And I'm not sure whether Professor Stefan Turner was able to join us, but Stefan, are you there? Can you put on your video and unmute? Let's see if Stefan has been able to join us. I'm not sure that Stefan is with us, in which case, if he joins us, we will still get him on, but in the meantime, we will turn to Professor Stuart Kaufman. Stu, as always, it's a delight to have you on. Please unmute yourself. And you are on video already. I've asked one of our colleagues to share your slides. I hope Anirban, either you or IT can help with sharing the slides. There we go. Stu, you're on. Please go ahead.
Naresh, thank you so much. I am more than pleased to find out about the center that you're all forming. The major issues that we confront are in fact spiritual. And I'm glad to have a chance to present some thoughts that bear on it. We're in the Anthropocene. We know it. And the central reason that we're in the Anthropocene is the global economy. Our economy is $100 trillion a year. It's been growing pre-COVID at something like 3% a year. It's a wonder. It's the accumulation of 300,000 years of our technological evolution and cumulative cultural growth. It's lifting millions of people out of poverty. It's linking our nations in trade. It provides the ways that we earn our livings and find much of our meaning. It's a wonder. But the same global economy, because it's so large and growing, is now driving climate change. We all know it. We see the coral reefs dying. We see the ocean levels rising, and the ice sheets in Greenland melting. It's driving a mass extinction that you were talking about, Naresh. But to put numbers on it, the United Nations estimates that in 30 years, 1 million species will have died. That's 20% of the standing diversity. Meanwhile, we're invading habitats all over the world because our economy is growing and we're getting wave after wave of pandemics. To put it bluntly, what we confront is a crisis that is global in scale. It's all over the world. It's first world civilization, so it's civilizational. And in fact, it's existential. We will either understand why we're here and try to understand how we can be on the planet in a different way, or we're going to succeed in destroying much of the biosphere that's accumulated its know-how for 3.7 billion years. As one of the earlier slides says, it's not the technology, it's the spirit. So I will remind you that Carl Jasper in 1949 discussed an era called the Axial Age from about 800 to 200 BC, when worldwide our classics came from Confucius and Buddha, and in Judea, the Hebrew prophets, and Aristotle and Socrates and Plato. It was a transition from magical religions to seeking something higher, the good, the true, and the beautiful. I genuinely think we need to think about what a new axial age might be. And an overview of it is, I'm trying to think of something, hang on. Roger Bacon in about 1560 wrote Novum Organum. And what he wrote was, I take all knowledge to be my province. We were getting past taking Aristotle's word. And then roughly he said to put nature on the rack and rest our due. And if two sentences summarize Western civilization and our attitude, that's it, rest our due. It's also in Genesis, it's also therefore spiritual, but it is thinking of the biosphere as something we can use for our benefit, where we are above nature, and the transformation has to be something like we are of nature. And I think that we have a small chance of doing it before we destroy everything. So this comes back to—
Whenever you want the slide to change, you should indicate that you would like the slide to change, right?
Yeah, so I want to try to, having said all of that big issues, they're the hugest issues we confront, Naresh. If we do not in the next 2 decades begin to understand what it will mean and how we can possibly become stable in the biosphere that we're disrupting, we're going to destroy millions of species. Global warming will get worse, and we'll have more and more pandemics. So please put on the first slide, and I'm going to try to tell you about an equation. It happens I wrote it down about 3 years ago on a napkin in this house on Crane Island. What I was trying to do, and this is now related very much to Brian Arthur's work. Brian talks about the build out of the economy, and the build out of the economy by combinations and ever new combinations, and building up from simple to complex technologies. I think this equation captures much of what Brian was talking about. I was trying to think, suppose that you have an economy with some number of goods. Well, let me tell you what I think about. If you think about the global economy, 40,000 or 50,000 years ago, the diversity of goods in the global economy was very small. In fact, if you go back 3 million years to Australopithecus, we had maybe 15 or 10 crude stone tools. By the time you get to Cro-Magnon, we have maybe a few hundred tools, 50,000 years ago. When you get to Mesopotamia, we have maybe 1,000 or 2,000 kinds of goods, ranging in complexity from arrowheads to chariots. In the last couple hundred years, the number of goods on the planet has exploded, as we just heard, to billions of different kinds of goods, ranging in complexity from knitting needles to space stations. How's that happened? So this equation that I wrote down may help us understand it. Imagine that you've got 40 goods in the economy now. That's MT, the number of goods in the economy, the first term on the right side of the equation. And what I wondered, will you have in the next period? Well, suppose you just carry forward the 40 things that are working now. And then what do? We have the things that work, and we try, as Brian said, to combine them to see if we can make something useful to solve some problem. So if we've got 40 things, we could try to modify any single thing. The axe in the 18th century in the United States got refashioned to become the axe of the 20th century. By the way, this is work with Roger Koppel and me and a number of others. So can you make things out of pairs of things? Well, of course you can. The printing press was made by combining movable type and a printing press. The Wright brothers airplane was a combination of four things: a light airfoil, a light gas engine, an airfoil, a bicycle wheel, and a propeller. So we do make goods out of combining things that we've got. This equation is almost the simplest equation you could write down. MT choose I, the term on the right says you have got 40 things, choose I of them. So if I is 1, you're choosing 1 out of 40. If I is 2, you're choosing all pairs of things out of 40. If I is 3, you're choosing all triplets of things out of 40. The importance of the term on the right, which this seems to be a new equation, is that the number of subsets of things goes up dramatically as I goes from 1 to 3 to 4 to MT over 2. And the summation runs over all possible sets of goods. So this equation does something quite miraculous. If you start with 40 goods, these are now theorems and numerical simulations. If you start with 40 goods, over time, it increases very glacially, and then all of a sudden it explodes upward explosively, and the continuous version of the equation reaches infinity in a finite time. It's got a pole. Roger Koppel looked at that a few years ago, and he says, my God, it looks like the Industrial Revolution. So let's go to the next slide. Next slide.
Well, we only have about 2 minutes more, if you can do it in that, please.
Yeah, I can. So this shows us GDP for the last 2,000 years, and you see that it's glacial and that it explodes upward. Look at the curve on the right. It's exploding upward. GDP in constant dollar terms is rushing upward. Almost, well, plausibly, this is due to this TAP process. I call the equation TAP, the theory of the adjacent possible. And what's really going on that we haven't factored into our thinking is the more things you already have, the easier it is to combine them and make new things. And we've been doing that for 300,000 years, and we're doing it now. That's the fundamental reason, I think, and Roger thinks, why our economy, our global economy, is exploding. It's so easy to invent things now. We keep inventing things. Well, now what? Oh, next slide, please, Naresh. So this theory also says that for anything that is invented, it has some parents. And this is unpublished data that is due to Sergio Valverde. This is for every patent, the number of its descendants in the patent data back 150 or 200 years. And it turns out it's a power law distribution. Most things have few descendant patents. Some things have a lot. It's power law, and this TAP equation is essentially predicting the slope. So this TAP equation may actually capture something about reality. So go back up one, please, Naresh. Can you go back up to the previous slide? Thanks. So one more thing about this? Another interpretation of this equation is that any time t, interpret MT not as the number of goods, but as the complexity of goods. Well, what this gives you is, so if MT is 40, the most complex good has 40 things in it. If MT is 1,000, the most complex good has 1,000 things in it. Well, that's basically right. You can't make a crossbow till you make a bow, and you can't make a space station until you have a rocket. Notice the rate of technological change is exploding. Proof. My father was born in 1903 as the airplane was invented. 66 years later, my son was born the year we landed on the moon by a completely different technology. The future is rushing at us because we are creating the possibilities of entering it. So when we think about, hey, we will confront the Anthropocene, we have to confront the fact that if we keep growing at 3% a year, if and when we recover from COVID, we can't. We can, but if we do, we're going to destroy the biosphere, and we're going to die with it. So as we think about the spiritual components of this, going back to the axial age, we need to try to understand how we can manage growth in such a way that we lift millions out of poverty. If we keep growing like this, we have to confront the fact as a species, we cannot keep doing this. And how we might ever conceive of being on the planet in a different way and not rushing into our own destruction is the biggest issue we face. It's overwhelming. Our species has never confronted problems on this scale. So to go back to what I said before, the biosphere is an ecology that has grown in diversity. It is codependent origination back 3.7 billion years ago. The economy globally is a codependent origination, and it's exploding because of roughly because of the tap process and things making niches for one another. New goods invite in their substitutes and complements. So once there's cell phones, you invite in the invention of apps. That's fundamentally an overview of what's happening. We confront challenges, and I've now said it. So your center is one of the places that might combine the kind of spirituality that's needed and some cognizance of what we're doing. And we have to start a discussion that's a global discussion now, not 20 years from now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stu. Brilliant as usual. Thanks very much. It's now my pleasure to turn it over. And if people have time and want to talk a little bit more and can stay on, that's fine. But we need to bring the formal part of our conversation to a close. Let me ask Professor Debajit Jha, who is the Deputy Director of the Center, and Debajit has been working really hard to make this happen. Thanks a lot for that, Debajit. But let me turn it over to you to move the vote of thanks as well as to any quick announcements. Debajit?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Singh. Actually, before, so it was a very exciting session. So every speaker here have said so many illuminating things that we came to know. And first of all, I'd like to share my slide. Just a minute. So can you see the slide?
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay. So two slides that Professor Singh couldn't show. So basically, I'd like to show that two slides. So it is first the announcement of the International Conference on Artificial Intelligence in Complex Socio-Economic Systems and Public Policy. So we have planned it in January 2021 from 20 to 23rd of January. And one more thing that was in the announcement that there is an edited volume that has come up from earlier conference that has happened in OP Jindal Global University earlier this year. So the title of the book is Quantum Decision Theory and Complexity Modeling in Economics and Public Policy. And there are four editors, Professor Anirban Chakravarti, Professor Emmanuel Haben, then Dr. Sudeep Patra and Professor Naresh Singh. So any communication regarding that, since it is open to all the others for the contribution in the book. So you can send your contributions to anirban@jnu.ac.in. So okay, so let me first thank or take this opportunity to thank Professor C. Rajkumar, the VC of OP Jindal Global University. Then Professor Sridhar Patnaik, the registrar, was present today. I'm extending my thanks to him as well. Professor Dean Ramaswamy Sudarshan, Professor Naresh Singh. So from the beginning, they have encouraged the establishment of this center. So a great thanks to them. Then I'm really indebted to the speakers that they have joined us in a very short notice. So I'd like to thank Professor Brian Arthur and Professor Dwayne Farmer in this for joining this session. Then I'd like to thank the panelists, Dr. Onindo Chakraborty, Professor Anirban Chakraborty, Professor Attilio Stella, and Professor Stephen Turner and Professor Stuart Kaufman. Though Professor Stephen Turner couldn't join us today, but definitely his presence could have been much more illuminating. So I want to mention a few institutions, those have contributed from the beginning to the establishment of the center. And definitely it is, first of all, the OP Jindal Global University that I should definitely extend my thanks to them. And the School of Jindal School of Government and Public Policy has contributed to the establishment of center, and the center is situated in the school only. So definitely we should thank them. The initial discussions earlier in last year in 2019 of this center has started in a discussion meeting in International Center for International Center for Theoretical Sciences in Bangalore. So their contribution is definitely highly appreciated. A large number of people has sent their congratulating messages for the establishment of the center. So I have so since and it is all over the globe, and since the list is very large, so I have mentioned their names in the slide. So I think there are 2 slides. So, and finally, I should definitely mention the contribution of the administrative staffs of our of OP Jindal Global University, and definitely the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. So, without their contribution, it couldn't have been possible. So, thank you all of you, and I think we can go with the discussion, or we can continue with the discussion.
So thanks to you, Debajit, for doing all of this, and it's heartwarming to see how many people are in fact engaged and supportive of this work. We only hope that we will be able to deliver on the expectations that we have created. I know it's getting late in India now. I don't know if at this stage Dean Sudarshan wants to come in and say anything before we open it up to any other panelists who might want to add something.
No, I just say I'm overwhelmed and very grateful. And this has been a very auspicious and super start with the goodwill and support of all of you who took part in this meeting. I think the center would be able to accomplish some things. So
thank you, Dean. Thank you very much. And so let's open the floor for a few minutes. If there are any things that other colleagues wanted to raise or to mention, we have a few minutes. Please unmute and let's hear your thoughts before we wrap up in about 10 minutes. Is there anything that anyone would like to add? We give a few minutes for the technology to be mastered, I guess. No, if not, then I think we can safely bring this to a close. Again, thanks to all of you, and we will get in touch. You have seen a number of activities that are coming forward. We will be in touch, and this is just the beginning. So thanks very much, and this brings us to the end. So we will leave the meeting now.
Thank you, Naresh. Thank you.
Thank you, Naraj.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
From the Netherlands.